Leading today's webinar, Managing Strategic Shifts in Your Supply Chain, are Brian Gibson, Wilson Family Professor of Supply Chain Management and Executive Director of the Center for Supply Chain Innovation at Auburn University, and Glenn Richey, a Harbert eminent scholar at Auburn University and Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Business Logistics, Jill Barron, Principal at Summit Advisory Team, and Mike Abruzzi, Vendor Relations Advisor for Brands for Less Group. So without further ado, I will share our poll results, and then I am pleased to turn the program over to our moderator. Take it away, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Patricia. If we can see our polling results.
If you can't see them, Brian, let me read them out for you. As we approach 2024, which supply chain topic is your primary concern? We have a split, three-way split between transportation, service quality and cost, talent availability and retention, and technology deployment and spending. So not in there with sourcing challenge or something else.
All right. So we have the three T's, transportation, talent, and technology, and we'll get into a little bit of some of those today. Certainly, we will hit the technology group as well, and certainly talk about some of those key issues as it relates to AI and other different tools that are available. Talent is always a concern, has been for the last 10 years. You know, we first started hearing about it with driver shortages, and it bled into other areas of supply chain, and we're certainly that will be an undercurrent of today. And then the transportation issue will come into play when we start talking about port operations and things that we can do there. So let me go ahead and we'll get started with our event today. There's no question that every day that you open up your news feed, or if you still read a newspaper, there's something different going on that requires you as a supply chain professional to think about, you know, how does this affect me? How do I respond to this? How do I deal with these types of issues? So we're always in this constant mode, whether it be, you know, a war in Ukraine or something going on in Israel right now with yet another war there, inflation reports coming out, you know, carriers going out of business, you name it. There's no shortage of things that we need to consider and look at. How do we respond over time? So that's really what we're going to do about today. Is how do we deal with some of these issues, and how do we set up our supply chain so that we can be successful and be responsive and be able to adapt to what's happening ultimately. And so our panel is going to talk about some of these issues today, and we welcome your input as well. So joining me today are Jill Barron, Principal from Summit Advisory Team, and she's got a number of years of experience in the retail sector as a supply chain executive. Mike Abruzzi, as you know, is now with Brands for Less, with Burlington Coat Factory for a number of years, so he brings another retail perspective. And my colleague, Glenn Richey from Auburn University, who is a supply chain researcher extraordinaire, and he will lend his insights as well. So the three of them will kind of really be the experts. I will serve as the moderator today and throw in an occasional comment as well. So it's kind of a back and forth, just discussion amongst the group today, kind of more of a podcast than a webinar, so to speak. We're just going to cover some key issues. First one of them being this whole idea of supply-based dynamics. As I mentioned, we've got all these things going on. And part of it is the politics that are happening. You know, what's going on out there that's really forcing companies to rethink what they're doing and how they're dealing with their supply bases. So I'm going to turn to Mike to kick it off, and then certainly Jill and Glenn can jump in as well. But Mike, what do you think are some of the big issues that you've seen and you've had to deal with from a supply basis coming into retailers?
So one of the things that we saw at Burlington was that vendors were starting to shift their base on their own. Wasn't necessarily a problem. We were trying to follow their trail. Some were leaving certain areas and going into other areas that they weren't at before, like Vietnam or different areas that we weren't usually working with. Um, Having that said, we kind of followed their trail and kept moving forward and just trying to see what other resources we can tap into in places like that. It just seemed to be, I know they were doing it more for cost, they were doing it more for labor. And as time went on, we saw more and more vendors making the shift to places that we didn't normally deal with. So it was kind of an interesting move that we were watching.
Gotcha. So, Jill or Glenn, any other factors that you see besides the cost equation and the labor issues that have been causing companies to rethink where they source their goods and where their supply bases should be located?
Yeah, Brian, I'll dive in for just a second on that, and then I'm sure Glenn has a good perspective as well. I think, actually, I was just reading something that came across my news feed this morning about yet another manufacturer that is, moving their production to Mexico, and their primary, which would be, I guess, classified right as nearshoring. Their main driver was margin improvement. They, were seeing rising cost in many other areas in the supply chain, and to help mitigate that and improve their margins, or it continued, I would say not improve their margins, but continue to let their margins maintain kind of stable. They were moving into Mexico. We've talked about this before. The socioeconomic factors is a big reason why a lot of manufacturers are moving, and then well as just the uncertainty of ports, right, may really drive manufacturers or suppliers to move to a more nearshoring option rather than an option that carries their product across the ocean into the United States.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Brian.
Glenn, anything else?
Yeah. I was going to mention, when we do our executive training and that type of thing at RVCF, one of the things that we try to focus on is kind of this dynamics of being effective in this crazy world that we live in today. And it seems like things used to be much leaner, much more predictable. And every week, it seems like there's a new variable to consider, especially in global transportation and distribution. So, focusing on issues that are directly tied to how the structure of your supply chain is set up, what policies could be flexed to make things flow easier, and then how to kind of make the processes that you have agile as possible are really kind of a three-pronged, three-legged stool approach to thinking strategically about these things. When Jill's talking about this new nearshoring and maybe even domestic shoring that we see around the world, those issues are patently important and growing by the day. I spent a week in Ghana not too long ago, and I will tell you that the Chinese manufacturers are all over West Africa looking for places to build in manufacturing and distribution points that will be connected to the United States at some point. So that's something that we probably should be thinking about as well, and looking for the opportunities to leverage that labor in those regions.
That's an interesting point, because, there's a lot of companies out there saying, hey, we want to, decouple a little bit, if not all, from China. But the key question then becomes, when you go to a new supplier, are they really from another country, or are they just China operating out of another country? Or the issue being, is there, other inputs that go into that product? Mike mentioned Vietnam. So if we move production of clothing for Burlington Coat Factory in Vietnam, where are the zippers coming from? Where are the buttons coming from? And are those still tying your organization and tying your supply chain to China? So that's kind of an interesting issue overall. So what are, as we move into some of these issues, and think about these realities of going about making some shift or being forced into some shift by our suppliers and or our customers, what kind of risks do we face? What kind of challenges are out there? And what can we do to minimize them? I'll throw that out to everybody.
I could start by saying I feel like in this shift away from a country, a factory, a location where have had a history of manufacturing, right? There's always that risk of the uncertainty of the labor market in the new location, the uncertainty of the social compliance in that area and or that factory. So I think, you've got to, there's a lot of homework that needs to be done, if you will, right before you make that move. But there are definitely risks when it comes to, moving away from, maybe an operation that has worked for you in the past, and you're now moving away for reasons that are that we mentioned before, whether it be margin, cost, socioeconomic issues. Yeah.
I knew having Jill go first would take most of what I was going to say, but I also just want to add to it, when vendors are going to these new locations, now it's a matter of, is the rest of the world supply chain connected to these countries? So, while it's great that people are moving to Vietnam or other countries or Ghana, what about freight carriers? Are they ready to now take on this extra workload? So, could we go backwards and end up the way we were during the pandemic, where nothing was moving? That's honestly been one of my concerns just about every time a new area pops up.
Yeah, infrastructure is a huge issue, right? Do they have the ports available? Do they have the road network? That's the big difference right now between where we currently import from and where we currently produce and where we don't currently produce. And that's something that's got to be handled quickly. And that's kind of what China is dealing with or chasing with their whole Belt and Road initiative. They're trying to help fund a lot of these African countries that Glenn was talking about to build up that infrastructure. So it's a key challenge for sure. Key opportunity if it works.
Yeah. I think
Glenn, any thoughts? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that what Glenn was mentioning is really fascinating. Like, if you are an organization or a manufacturer and your primary driver to move away from China is a socioeconomic issue, like moving your production to Africa is not going to help, right? If at the core those manufacturing sites are going to be owned by China. I think that's a really interesting kind of angle, and I think it just speaks to, as a manufacturer, you have to really understand kind of what your North Star is of why you're leaving China if you are indeed going down that path.
Yeah, I would say, the fundamental driver that I see in all of this movement to different sourcing locations really goes back to, I guess, about 20 years of us telling the operations people, optimize, 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 and focusing on that landed cost and that type of thing. And that pushed us into a lot of sole sourcing and those types of opportunities. In my research today, I see companies backing off of that in a pretty significant way, thinking more about trying to be more effective in the market than looking for pure efficiency. And so being kind of focused more on responding to the demands than thinking, first about cost. I don't know if Jill and Mike are experiencing that, but I am seeing that in some of these different global sourcing locations where I visit and do research.
And I think the other thing that comes into play is capacity. Right, we're seeing that with chip industry. Just when we think we're in a panic and we can't source chips and we don't have enough capacity globally to build microprocessors, so we say, hey, we're going to devote a lot of money from the U.S. government to help fund these facilities. They take years to build. They take a lot of skilled people and equipment that may not quickly be available. And who knows, by the time that you get the facility built, will there be that capacity crunch anymore that necessitated the additional capacity or the move away from a problem in another country? So that kind of comes into play. I think back and telling myself here, years ago, I probably 20 years ago, I got asked to do a presentation, supply chain presentation for the National Footwear Association, and I was looking at their program, and they were all concerned about new tariffs on athletic shoes and other types of shoes coming into the United States. And my pithy solution was, well, just bring all the production back to the U.S. And I summarily got taken to task with, there is no shoe production capacity in the United States. So that's another big issue. It's one thing to say we want to move. It's another thing to have the resources to do it. The issues that everyone talked about with the infrastructure, the carriers, the labor in those countries at affordable rates, and certainly the capacity to actually pull it off. My question is, Jill mentioned a lot of production coming back to Mexico. Are they going to run short on labor? Or are they going to be able to figure out a way to take all the people that are trying to come into the United States and say, hey, stay here, we have jobs for you, and opportunities there. So it's all very interesting, all very fluid today. Well, let's turn a little bit, and a related issue, as we start to move products from other countries and we start to get things towards the United States. We've been through all kinds of chaos over the years with ports, right? We had shortages, we had ships waiting for days and weeks at a time off the West Coast, and during the pandemic, all that congestion at the ports. We had the threat of longshoreman strikes on the West Coast, and we'll have those potential threats again in summer of 2024 on the East Coast, and volume shifts that happened to deal with the congestion on the West Coast and the labor issues on the West Coast. We kind of shifted the problem right to the East Coast. So what are we dealing with here, or what are the challenges that we're facing ultimately? What can the retailers and their suppliers expect to run into as we get goods close to home or into the ports? Jill, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Brian, I think you kind of mentioned the looking back of what's happened kind of in the timeline of our port issues. And, certainly spot on. Everybody knows about the issues that happened during the pandemic with the kind of historic congestion. And, what we're seeing now in really Q3 in the ports is that, the labor concerns have calmed a little bit. And you also have areas where your U.S. retailers are reducing their imports into the country as they're downgrading their imports. They are reducing their inventories. What has kind of been an unfortunate result of retailers shifting and trying to be more dynamic based on the congestion is now you're seeing some imbalance in rail times and dwell times in rail yards, or the rail path, because you have a lot of companies who moved their imports to land over, whether it be the Gulf of Mexico or on the East Coast, and now you have an imbalance of rail availability. Another really interesting, you mentioned the longshoremen's contract, which is up again in 2024. So that will be like Groundhog Day, resurfacing all of those labor concerns. The other really interesting thing, and that some people are really not talking a lot about, is the issue with the Panama Canal. And the water levels in the Panama Canal are, they're fed by a reservoir, and that reservoir is pretty far below kind of the normal water levels needed. And so you're already, if you have decided to take your freight through a different route, and that route be through the Panama Canal, you're already experiencing delays. There are some smaller vessels that are seeing, 2 and 3 weeks delay in getting through that canal. So it's just, it's a kind of a never-ending kind of challenge of how, as a retailer or importer, you have to manage these headwinds that seem to come up every other month or so. How can companies mitigate that? I think, the biggest thing is you have to be agile. You have to have options. You have to understand, what are your options of bringing product to other ports? How much of a delay is that going to give you? What does that affect your margins or the cost? So I'll just kind of leave it at there. I think there's probably a lot to talk about here, but I don't have a crystal ball of what the magic pill is to be able to handle these headwinds, but agility is probably the best word that I can think of.
Great, excellent points. Glenn, Mike, what are your thoughts about the inflows into the U.S.? What can we do with these issues? And what are they, and what can we do about them?
I think Jill said it perfectly. I mean, there is no crystal ball, and the thing you don't want to do is wake up in the morning to find out there's something else going on. There definitely was a shift to move product through the Panama Canal. Everybody thought that was a great idea. I guess nobody checked the weather report to see how the reservoir was doing, because the backup that's there just is causing even more delays than it would have been to save the time to bring it through. And unfortunately, over just the last I'm just going to go back 3 years, there's always been like this major thing to kind of deal with. And I think just being ready to make a shift, call an audible, is probably the best call out to do. You can't be locked into one particular thing. And you just have to be ready to make a change. And that's probably the only advice I could throw out there.
Pray for rain. That's your other option, I guess.
Pray for
Yeah, Brian. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's a bit of a checklist out there for things, and I think Jill and Mike have really hit on a number of those things. Obviously, the alternative port option out there, and looking around to see, for example, ports like Savannah that have done a significant investment to try to carry more capacity through the system. I do also think that maybe some of the listeners, and this is all industry specific, but using free trade zones to do assembly before it gets to the market can be a good positive thing. Obviously, that doesn't work in some consumer good areas, but it is an option to kind of get the product here. And along those same lines, there's been a good bit of investment in warehousing now after some of the crutches that we had. So the real estate community has been spending a lot of time on that. Other than that, traditional inventory management issues like having some safety stock, is an idea to try to help your forecasting. And then thinking again about moving further away from that sole sourcing approach to something that's more of a rationalized grouping of 2 or 3 different suppliers. And if possible, having one of those suppliers be domestic. Obviously, those are all, ifs and buts, but certainly there are kind of the top 5 things that are being recommended today.
Yeah, and that really does speak to the benefit and the need for companies to do some contingency planning. And what are we going to do for business continuity? 3 years ago, it was how do we find capacity, right? How do we find ships, because they were also loaded up and the rates were going through the roof, and there was so much coming in that the ports couldn't handle them. And today, the pendulum has swung the other way, and now you probably have more concerns as a freight customer. Are they going to cancel voyages, or are they going to cut back on volume so that they can try, the carriers can try to maintain some level of rates and not get into that, vicious downward cycle? So that's a critical issue. So you need to plan for those things. You need to think about, the issues related to what if we have an El Nino winter? What does that do in Panama? Now, it's not going to shut down the Panama Canal completely, but I think, as Mike said, it's going to slow down transit times. And I even saw an article where it talked about, they're going to have to start not carrying quite as many containers per ship as they are capable of because of the draft issues and the depth issues of the canal. So those are all impacting us. There was an interesting article in Journal of Commerce a couple months ago that talked about some of these potential disruptions in 2024, and I think the group has really hit a lot of them. One of the other big challenges we have, or we saw during the pandemic, and can certainly rear its ugly head as the economy starts rolling again, is congestion at the ports, whether it be, not having enough draymen, not having enough chassis, not having enough, landside capacity to handle containers, and, just the general congestion at Los Angeles. I had a student in my class last fall who works in LA, and we'd have these bi-weekly phone calls with the students, and he talked about every week how much longer the lines were getting on the interstate to get in and out of the port, and how much it was tying up traffic. So, Jill, we had talked a little bit about this the other day. How can companies get out of this vicious cycle of all things Los Angeles and all the congestion and all the challenges at Los Angeles and Long Beach, whether it be the port or warehousing?
Right. I mean, I think, Glenn brought up, looking for alternative ports. I think deconsolidation is also critical as well. So even if you need to bring it into another port, you work with, a third party, logistics provider or a deconsolidation provider to provide those services for you to help you then really distribute the product, the inventory or your shipments across the country the most efficient way as possible if you can't always go into the port of Los Angeles. So I think deconsolidation is going to be really important, as well as companies look to try to mitigate some of those delays or potential delays that they may see on the West Coast.
Interesting. Good. All right. Well, let's move forward to our third topic, dealing with technology and technology deployment. Seems like AI is the blockchain of 2023. We just can't stop hearing about it. People won't stop talking about it and writing about it. A lot of fear of what the artificial intelligence can bring. A lot of fear of missing out as well. So, Glenn, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the AI space and why we in supply chain should focus on it and care about it?
Yeah, happy to do so, Brian. I'm also happy to tell the audience that about 18 days ago, I published an academic article on this that looks at kind of all the different uses, so kind of a primer on all the different uses that we think AI can be applied to, and then it works into a call for research where I'm specifically asking the researchers that are out there around the world to start focusing in on these areas and try to get us some best practices in place. But I mean, this can be a tool. AI is a little different than blockchain. Certainly, it can be more specific to an individual company. It can also be spread across the supply chain. Of course, the blockchain is by its shape spread across the supply chain. But AI could be as simple as helping you rewrite policy, rewrite issues that you'd like to see built into contracts or built into your documentation. Or it can be all the way down into supervised machine learning that allows you to put together some kind of cybersecurity assessments or run robotics, cobots, what have you. So there's a whole spectrum of things that kind of run from the level of information and the height of the need that you'd expect to see in the marketplace. I do think this is something that's going to be around with us for a while. There's a lot of very positive hype about it, but there are also some things inside that are problematic, because certainly remember that we're the ones that are programming the initial information into AI and then kind of putting it on its way as we kind of supervise its learning. Those certainly still exist in this technology, but there are opportunities to do things that build your customer service, that improve your operational efficiency, that help you build out cyber resilience, and also build out better business models and better business strategies. And for the people on this call, it's all about efficiency in terms of time and the opportunities to get in there and kind of shorten the distance between getting the product where it's developed, built, manufactured, and getting it to market. So lots of opportunities out there. And I think that if RVCF would like to put this up on the website, it's open access, so I'd be happy to share it.
Excellent. Jill, Mike, do you have any thoughts or have any experience with trying to work with AI?
Yeah, I think Glenn sounds like you are the foremost expert in this. So I'm going to go out and read your academic article. That's going to be interesting. I think at a high level, AI allows you to kind of operate with probabilities without extensive kind of programming, and allowing you, especially in the supply chain, to kind of analyze complex data sets. I also think that AI will help organizations look across multiple supply chain functions and to analyze what's happening in each of those kind of disparate supply chain functions, to pull together a comprehensive solution plan, perspective, output, whatever you want to call it, versus a lot of disparate supply chain systems, whether that be WMS or OMS or your execution systems within your four walls of your DCs, or fulfillment and allocation models, right? All kind of work somewhat in silos. And what AI and machine learning, I think, enables companies to do in a much quicker manner without that complexity is to connect all of those supply chain systems together to provide the retailer a more holistic kind of perspective and view on what's happening in their organization.
Yeah, good points. And you really led into our next question, which is really, it looks like it's both a current option and a future promise, right?
Yeah.
Mike, do you have any thoughts, or anybody want to add anything?
I just know I'm looking forward to seeing what the new options are going to be. It just seems like there's something new popping up every day. So just interesting to see the new technology that's coming our way.
Yeah, Brian, I was gonna. Oh, sorry, Jill, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Glenn.
No, I was just going to say, Brian, I think that we kind of look at 4 areas where we think the most promise is. And Jill hit on one of those, coordination, collaboration, building out those relationships and kind of monitoring those relationships as well and thinking about the long term. But there are also internal things strategically that we can reevaluate our practices and processes and try to streamline those. And there are external opportunities for kind of reconfiguration of the network itself and maybe building in some innovation that we haven't thought about in the past. But ultimately, and probably early on, the assistance here ought to be around kind of incremental decision making, and then even looking at broader based things like risk management and what are those ugly things that might jump up on the horizon that we don't see, but a system that can evaluate a ton of information at one time can.
Yeah, right. I will be touching on at the RVCF a session on AI in the supply chain. It sounds like I need to have Glenn. You need to be my co-presenter with in this session. But some of the topics that I'll touch on is the use of AI in demand forecasting, inventory optimization and fulfillment and route planning, and those are kind of very specific use cases, but I'll get into a little bit more details on in those areas of use. I would say my experience with machine learning in relative to inventory optimization and fulfillment for D2C orders back at Neiman Marcus was being able to utilize machine learning to understand optimum inventory levels for certain subsets of inventory in your store locations. And rather than having, a group of analysts that are analyzing your inbound receipts, your outbound orders, your inventory levels, other aspects of the store, such as, tendency to mark down that item. What are the customers buying in that store? And rather than having a human take all of that input and trying to, determine what are my optimal levels of inventory at each store, you are really using machine learning to help you do that for you. And it's found it to be very successful and just really fascinating that it doesn't take long with analyzing sets of historic data in order for the machine to learn. It's pretty cool.
Yep, it really is. And this whole idea of AI it's not new. Right? We've been doing some of this stuff for years. We just haven't necessarily labeled it as such. I mean, I think back to, technology salespeople trying to sell us expert systems, right? And neural networks and things of that idea. So these are all things that are out there. I think the capabilities are getting better. The capabilities are to the point where we can, as individuals, go online and use them for free, right? And use some of these generative AI tools to help us with some day-to-day challenges and issues that we have to deal with. I think the interesting thing is there's a lot of fear being sown out there, about job losses and people being replaced by machines, which I think has been in science fiction for a couple hundred years probably. And certainly the idea of the machines getting too smart, and this idea of the machines being able to learn on their own or becoming sentient. And there was a keynote presentation at the most recent CSCMP conference, and the person on stage who works at one of the universities basically said, absolutely not. That's not happening. It can't happen. If you're saying that these AI systems can go rogue on you and can start thinking on their own and can start doing things without your input, those folks don't understand what AI is or how it operates. They don't understand the basic, computer technology behind it. So I thought that was very interesting. And she also was pretty adamant of, you know, a lot of supply chain activities will not become, you know, replaced by AI. So yes, you can get the AI to crunch your numbers and look at a lot of different potential combinations and throw information to you, but we still have to be decision makers. We still have to deal with the issues that pop up. We still have to be, you know, the agile capability. Now, build a good expert system, build a good AI system, and you can certainly get options and whatever you build into your list in a you know, plan for responding to disruptions. It can help you with those things very quickly. Will it get to the point where it's suggesting new and novel ideas that were never thought of before? I don't think we're there yet. I don't know if we'll ever get there. So kind of interesting stuff, but you know, listen to the experts that you know, the folks that are actually using it, deploying it, not the pundits out there, not the politicians who have whatever reason to want to fear it. So any other thoughts on AI, or anybody want to chime in with anything else about AI or any other technologies that can really help us manage supply chain challenges?
I think one more thing I'd like to say about AI, Brian, is it will be a headache for folks in the industry. And I can give you an example from the research world of something that happened that was a bit shocking to me about 3 weeks ago. And let me start off by saying the research process is one in which these research documents, manuscripts, are submitted to one journal at a time. That's the only ethical way that you can do it. And then it's reviewed, goes through the process, and it's either accepted or rejected at about a 5 to 10% rate of acceptance. But we had something 3 weeks ago. A fake author from a fake university submitted 120 papers at the same time to 120 different journals. That was totally driven by AI. The papers were slightly altered so that they were just a little bit different. And of course, as editors, we have to go out there into the system and find those things. So you can imagine how something similar could happen in a sourcing environment and cause a lot of bad bidding, or maybe even just bad relationships. So that'll be something we'll have to be on the lookout for. Great
points. But there's got to be somebody behind that idea of let's send out 120 articles or submissions, right?
That's correct. That's correct. There is somebody behind it. It's not the Terminator. It's an individual person getting it going.
Yep. Interesting. All right. Patricia, do you want to go ahead and open up and see if we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, of course. We will offer general discussion now. Attendees, you can either individually unmute yourself. I'm giving you the ability to do so now. Or if you wish, you can enter questions via the control panel's question dropdown. Please go ahead and do either. And we do have a question to get us started. What is the outlook for ports and ocean transportation in 2024?
So I don't know if I'm unmuted.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the AI thing, and I want to just state a point that AI is not a magic button, right? And so I think it was even Marcus noted the fact that they had analyzed inventory levels and applied machine learning to it to determine the most appropriate level of inventory per store, blah, blah, blah. And I think that raises a very good point, is that AI can only run against data that you've connected it to. You may have an SCM system that has AI, but it may not touch anything in your logistics system or your inventory management system because that data is not connected with it. And so any of you that are out there looking at, I'm going to do AI or I'm going to do machine learning, you really have to look at, what content, historical data, because it develops trends, what historical data is connectable to it, and make sure you apply the right tool. If you have something that you want to umbrella over many different systems in your business, you want to make sure you acquire the right machine learning or AI tool so it has the ability to connect in and pull data from those systems and working with IT, make sure that that doesn't create a hackable nightmare of malware. So just wanted to put out that point. We'll go back on mute. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. I had kind of down in my notes to talk about is what are the challenges in the implementation of AI, and you hit on all three of them that I had down: data quality, system integration, and cybersecurity concerns. Without good quality data, and then the ability to integrate those disparate systems, and you kind of is garbage in, garbage out, and could also, you know, risk cybersecurity concerns as well, or introduce those concerns into your organization.
Yeah, it was a great comment for sure. And I'll just throw in there that, you know, that this is just a tool. It's a sophisticated tool, and it can help us deal with the velocity of information, with the volume of information, with kind of varieties of different type of information, pooling them and trying to build in categories for us to help understand. But it definitely does not right now deal with the veracity well. And so you really have to give it the smell test and make sure that the technology is actually saying something legitimate, because it will produce multiple versions of the truth, some of which obviously aren't true.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Patricia, I was going to go back to the question about the ports and the ocean shipping. I think, you know, this decline, or at least I'm hoping that this decline that we're seeing in 2023 with port activity, especially on the West Coast, hopefully we'll have a soft landing, or we're having a soft landing here, and that volumes will increase both for the ports and the ocean carriers. There's forecasts out there, you know, between 3 and 4% growth next year. I think that's one hope that organizations are looking for, and we'll see more inventory flowing. I think what we really need to look forward to, and really what organizations need to be, or port authorities and organizations need to be looking at, is how do we harness all this technology to create smart ports with artificial intelligence, with a lot of automation. I was in Barcelona this summer and had an opportunity to go on a port tour. So we went out on a boat and drove through the entire harbor, and at the far end of the harbor at Barcelona was a fully automated port run by, as you might expect, a Chinese company. Very few people there, very fast, operates 24/7. And so those types of capabilities are really going to help organizations get their product much faster, help ocean carriers be much more efficient in terms of turning their ships around and getting them, you know, back and moving, and helping the ports become much more effective in their roles. Now, the challenge we have in the U.S. is, can we add that level of automation from both a cost standpoint, number one, because a lot of times there are governments that are funding those port improvements, and they're getting it past the longshoremen and other unions who are always in fear of losing their jobs. So we need to look at that as a real opportunity to deal with and prevent some of the problems that we've had over the last few years.
Thank you kindly. We do have another question that has come in. Short of AI and machine learning, where do you see the adoption of business process automation, or RPA, to offset ongoing labor shortages?
Well, I can make, you know, general comments on that. You know, the place that we're really seeing it, I guess, is at the customer service level, and a lot of those connections are related to chatbots and that type of thing that can get a customer through basic questions and basic issues without having to draw physical labor into it. Then again, though, we're not really sure in the estimations of customer satisfaction if that's working well yet or not. So certainly there's an opportunity there. I would expect the other adoption that you would see is a bit higher level, certainly around robots, picking machines, and those types of things. Certainly you could use this as well in cycle counting and trying to derive where product's been lost or where it might be inside the facility.
Yep. Yeah, and I've heard of a number of organizations looking at using RPA for some of their fundamental forecasting issues in terms of doing some of their demand planning and automating that data flows and the data crunching. So the goal is to take people away from those highly repetitive tasks of creating and managing Excel spreadsheets or whatever forecasting tool that you're using, automate those processes and put the person in the position and give them more time to study the output and make some decisions. That's where we really need to have more of that happening. And certainly, as Glenn mentioned, the whole area of order processing, order payment, things of that nature that we can, continue to automate along the way.
Thank you. And I think building upon that really is, besides AI, what other emerging technologies are impacting supply chain managers?
I think without question, we've talked about this a little bit today, and we're seeing it everywhere, is the whole idea of using automation in warehouse operations, in particular fulfillment processes. You can go everything from automating or providing cobots and assistive technologies to make order picking easier, all the way up to fully automating a facility with inbound, receiving trucks all the way through loading trucks and everything in between at the distribution center. I've seen, small implementations of automation and massive investments into, 500,000 square foot facilities where the only people you really see running around are the people that are there to make sure the technology is working right, make sure the machines are properly maintained, and a handful of people on the receiving end and a handful of people on the shipping end, and very few people doing anything order related inside the building. So I think automation and to help us with shortage of labor costs, speed issues that we need to have today in distribution operations. We can run them 24/7, as I've heard many people say from the distribution world. On a Saturday night, a machine's not going to call in sick because it's got a date, right? I used to have that happen all the time when I had 18 to 23-year-olds working shifts on Friday and Saturday nights because they were the newest hires and they got the worst shifts. And you always wondered if you were going to have enough people to process the orders. Bring in automation, that's no longer an issue. So we can create a lot of flexibility and a lot of capabilities in our processes with automation technologies. Any other thoughts on technologies that can really help us today?
Yeah, Brian, I would actually say that, it was the big hot thing quite some time back, RFID tech, and it seems like it's resurfacing as more important in the supply chain. At the retail level, researchers and managers alike are confused as to how our inventory accuracy can become so poor over the course of 60 days to 90 days. It can go from 90% sometimes to 70, 60% inside a retail establishment. And RFID is one of the pathways to try to deal with that issue. And certainly we know if our inventory is more accurate, then we're going to get more sales. So there are a group of us right now that are actually looking into this. We've got a number of major retailers that are at play, and we're actually doing an experiment where we'll have at these different retailers 15 different stores that are actually implementing a full-blown RFID based shop, and then holding 5 back that again are just the old traditional barcodes and scanning to try to see if we can figure out where the real emphasis is on losing that inventory accuracy. So more on that as we progress with it, but we are seeing kind of a lot of strength in that area when it comes to RFID. And the other nice thing about RFID is the cost continued to go down, which was prohibitive for quite some time.
Good points.
I would just agree with both of those. The automation within the four walls and RFID are probably the two at the top of my mind of investments that you can make outside of AI.
Definitely when it comes to order picking and storage of product within the building, I've seen a lot of automation between robots and just simple product handling. It's definitely changed over the last just couple of years, and definitely looking forward to seeing what's coming up with that also in the future.
There's no doubt that it won't stop, right? And while there's a lot of technologies that are more hype than promise, like driverless trucks and things of that nature, there's a lot of very useful technologies that are going to continue to make supply chains more efficient, make us better decision makers as supply chain professionals, and hopefully help us deal with the challenges that we talked about today. So with that, what I want to do is just thank my three panelists for adding their insights and their expertise to the call today. Jill, Mike, and Glenn, we appreciate your inputs and your thoughts and some of the things that you may be talking about or participating in at the RVCF conference. I want to give a big plug out to RVCF and encourage everybody to join us in Scottsdale, and just not even a month from now. So it's going to be happening, and certainly we want to thank all of our participants for joining us today, for your questions and your attention. We hope that you gained some real value from the session today. And again, let me remind you that we've got the fall conference coming up November 5th through the 8th in Scottsdale. You heard Jill mention that she's going to be talking about artificial intelligence. There's a lot of other great sessions, and Glenn and I will be hosting a kind of a half-day workshop on how do we go after things like perfect fulfillment in such a challenging environment as we're dealing with today. And so it'll be an interactive workshop where we present some information as well as put you to work a little bit and have you look at some scenarios and get some good group discussion. And then also as the third leg of our engagement with RVCF is if you have some folks on your team that are new to supply chain, maybe they were working in a different part of the business and they jumped over to supply chain, or they've come to your organization and they are a great potential person, but they don't have a lot of background. We do have this online study course called Global Supply Chain Fundamentals that you can work with them through, or we can put them together with this content and have them work through that as well. And you get more details, both the conference and the course on the RVCF website. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Patricia to wrap us up for the day.
Thank you, and I thank you all for attending today's presentation. I will be sending out a link to the on-demand version of this webinar as soon as the file is available, and I will also include in there the contact information, the email addresses of those who participated today as panelists. Thank you all, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.